Okay, this lesson for the Cornet Project class will demonstrate why there's more than a 90% chance that the apostasy, apostasy, refers to rebellion or what we call apostasy, a transliteration, rather than a departure or a departure which would refer to the rapture. Now, that's according to Lee W. Brainard, and I don't know where I've been, but a couple of years ago when I first saw a video about apostasy, apostasia meaning departure, I made a response to it. I had no idea how large of a topic, how much has been written, but there's a book written by Lee W. Brainard. I'll put the title, of course, I'll put that on the thumbnail, and I'll put the title in the description. It's an ebook on Amazon. It's around $5, I think. And then, of course, we'll cover that in just a moment, and I'll also review someone who has subject matter expertise and specialized knowledge in all things eschatological from Old Testament to New. He has a total Bible view from Genesis to Revelation. It's extraordinary, the work he's done. And he's very patient. He's methodical. Some think he takes it and to the extreme, but that's only if you're not as interested in it as sometimes as I've learned, there's a lot more energy about a topic until you really start to do the work. Then the energy dissipates quickly, and it's more quelled when someone starts to think about it. So we're just going to look at the three key verse 1 through 3, and the key words we have parousia. That's return or bodily return of Christ. Then we have this word also in verse 1, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 1. We have this word episynagoges, which you notice the word synagogue, gathered upon, speaking upon him, the Lord Jesus Christ. Then we have verse 2, we have the day of the Christ. So this is return bodily. Here's rapture, gathered together with him. Here's the day of Christ, the Bema seat. Here's the apostasy, which is what we were discussing in the first place. And I'll read in a moment some more about what Lee W. Brainard said. But he's saying it's rebellion, or as my professor taught, the defection. And then, of course, here's the man of the sin. Now, that's ultimate, absolute negation of the testimony of Christ. He's called, like Judas was, the son of the perdition or destruction. This is destruction, son of the destruction. And before I read from Dr. Wilkin, Brother Howard, and Brother Brainard, I'd just like to point out that I'm trying to find the different forms of dispensationalism. So let's just say D1 and D2 for a moment. When it comes to Matthew 24, for example, there are those who are dispensationalists, all pre-tribulation advocates such as Lee W. Brainard and Dr. Bob Wilkin. But the difference is some say, yes, there is a rapture in Matthew 24. So they say yes. And then other one will say no rapture, as what Ken Bell wrote and informed me of. No rapture in Matthew 24. And then in first and second Thessalonians, D1 and D2, let's just take these, as I've come to be aware recently, that there are those that say no rapture in Matthew, but yes here. And then there are those who say both yes in Matthew and yes here. But the note I wanted to make was that departure, if it's departure, the advocates of pre-trib rapture, this term, the apostasia, does not depend upon it being departure or not. And Lee Brainard also mentioned that. And let me get to the notes very quickly. Been a long night. Spent many hours last night with someone who was sick, and then most of the day, and that was an honor, but I'm glad they're better. And so it says the nouns are apostasis, sedition, rebellion, apostasy. Apostasia is sedition, rebellion, apostasy. Apostates refer to rebel, apostate, deserter, runaway. Apostasion even refers to divorce. And there are forms, apostasis, which is sedition, apostasy, apostatesis, rebellion, and apostasos, rebellion and apostasy. The adjective is apostatikos, rebellious. The family has its own verb forms. Anyway, what he was showing was just being aware of this family sheds much light on the correct interpretation of apostasia. If the family has its own verb forms, then apostasia and apostasis can't be regarded as identical triplet nouns of aphistemi. Aphistemi is stand away, the root form, the etymological form of it. But he says we would expect the semantic range to track much more closely with the more closely related verbs aposteo and apostasizo than with the more distantly related verb apistemi. So he does a lot of language work. He has this transliterated, so it's easier for me to just read the Koine Greek than to try to read the transliterations. But his point is that he takes and he has evaluated in his book. Let me read his title of his book. He has an entire book on this subject. He says he spent over 2,000 hours researching, and he says rapture or apostasy. And he says that one would do well to do the research around AD, when Paul wrote around AD 51 and 52. He said, so our window would be 2 centuries prior and 2 centuries following. So in last lesson we were showing translations before the King James that said departure. Now, it didn't say departure from the earth, and some have translated, said departure from the faith, like a deserter, as was mentioned. So he's saying that unless we study those words, we won't be able to truly reflect what was meant or intended. Now, that's a book I just acquired, I think it was, today, and began looking at it. And then I came and noticed that he said the only 2 senses of apostasia we can consider is 1, political sedition, 2, religious apostasy. Therefore, he concluded there's a 90% chance, without even looking at the context of 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3, he said that the meaning of the apostasia is religious apostasy. And then, of course, I received feedback from Rick Howard, Brother Rick Howard. He says the apostasia is the abomination of desolation. He says the apostate commits the apostasy, the rebel commits the rebellion. He said what his father, talking about the apostate and the rebel, Lucifer did in heaven is now done on earth. The same sin of 2:4 in both instances. So 2:4 is the commentary of 2:3. Notice this is a major point here. It is the abomination of desolation that manifests his total rebel spirit, and this is the time he is fully revealed for who he is. So chapter 2, verse 4 speaks to the 2 items of chapter 2, verse 3. Let the context of the text provide the answer instead of seeking the answer outside of the text. That's an excellent point, especially for hermeneutics. And here we notice the day of Christ in the Dr. Bob Wilkin, spoke of the Bema seat as this day of Christ. He gave references, and I'll put a couple of sentences from that so you can reference that from that commentary. He also agrees that since it's the apostasy, it might be specifically referring to the abomination of desolation. So both Dr. Bob Wilkin and Brother Rick Howard identify as the abomination of desolation, the apostasia, meaning the definitive expression of it here This research by Lee W. Brainard says that for him, it's a 90% chance, without even looking at the context, that it's referring to a religious apostasy and not the rapture. And then what we have are the key words here. And you notice this is from being alongside, but we have here the understanding as return bodily of Christ. We have epi and gathering together upon, synagogue, where we get the word synagogue, to gathering upon, that's the basis, Christ in his return. And here the day of the Christ, and there's references to that in other texts, book of Philippians and Corinthians. And then, of course, here, the conclusion of Rick Howard, Bob Wilkin, and Brainard, is at the rebellion, and then, of course, the man of the sin and the son of the destruction. This is the same person. In the future, this man of sin, this lawless one, a false prophet will come along who is the Antichrist. But this is it. This is enough. It's what I could gather from it with a few minutes and little time I had. Again, yesterday, a family required and it was warranted, me being at a major critical surgery and a life-threatening matter for a great family, and we're all close to them. And then, of course, last night and today with someone who was very ill. But that's just the work pastoring. This is just a few minutes I have to distill this down for you. So I'll step out of the way and let you look at it. Again, I'll reference that book, and then I'll put some notes from Rick Howard, and then you can see this for yourself. So again, the main thing is I did not know, but this really has nothing to do with whether or not your view, if you believe in and support pre-tribulational rapture, this wouldn't be a deal breaker for that. And of course, when you notice there are dispensationalist different expressions of it that say yes and no to a rapture in Matthew, and both say yes and yes to rapture here in these letters. So have a blessed day. Enjoy this lesson.